"You're just the nephew. That diamond belongs to me, his only son." My Uncle Marcus's voice echoed through the cold, sterile air of the bank's security vault, his finger jabbing toward the heart of Abaddon, which glittered with a wicked, mesmerizing light behind the bulletproof glass. He'd been gone for 20 years, having dismissed our family's legacy of gem crafting as worthless junk. Now, he was back not for his father, but for the $100 million curse he believed was his birthright. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we step into a world of deadly sparkle, where a legendary diamond becomes the epicenter of a family war. This is the story of Leo, the guardian of a legacy, and his unforgiving confrontation with his greedy uncle, a battle meticulously orchestrated from beyond the grave by a master artisan. The air inside the private Zurich bank vault was so cold it felt like it could freeze the very breath in your lungs. It wasn't the simple chill of air conditioning. It was a deep, penetrating cold that radiated from tons of steel, concrete, and state-of-the-art security systems designed to crush any hope of intrusion. The atmosphere was thick, a strange mixture of old metal, ozone from the electronics, and the scent of long-term archival paper. Cold white LED lights shone from the ceiling, leaving no shadows, making everything feel flat and lifeless, like a laboratory or a morgue. Leo felt the hairs on his arms stand on end, not just from the temperature, but from the immense weight of the moment. He stood there, a 25-year-old man with the calloused hands of a craftsman, feeling utterly out of place amidst this sterile, heartless luxury. Before him, displayed reverently on a titanium pedestal and encased in a ridiculously thick block of bulletproof glass, was the heart of Abaddon. It wasn't a stone, it was a living entity, a burning heart trapped in crystal. Its red was unlike any red Leo had ever seen. It wasn't the red of a ruby or a garnet. It was the red of arterial blood, the red of a final sunset, the red of a dying fire that still burned with ferocious intensity. Under the LED lights, it didn't just reflect the light. It seemed to devour it, pulling it into its core before spitting it back out in 1,000 tiny shards of light that danced on the steel walls like malevolent sprites. His grandfather, Elias, used to say its facets were cut so perfectly they could bend space and time. As a child, Leo thought it was just a fairy tale. But now, standing before it, he felt a strange pull, a hypnotic allure. It was dangerously beautiful, a beauty that promised everything and threatened to take it all away. The silence was shattered by the harsh, ragged breathing of Marcus. He stood opposite Leo, the diamond between them. The Uncle Leo vaguely remembered from old photographs and fragmented memories was now here in the flesh. A man nearing 50, but greed and a hard lifestyle had worn him down. The expensive Armani suit couldn't hide his paunch. The slicked-back hair couldn't conceal the thinning patches and receding hairline. But the most terrifying thing was his eyes. They were locked on the diamond, shining with a raw, sick hunger. He didn't see beauty or legacy. He saw numbers. $100 million. A life of luxury. Power. Revenge. For years he felt he had been slighted. "It has to be mine," he repeated, his voice a hoarse, guttural growl. "I'm his son, his blood. You're just the nephew." Standing between them, like a referee in an impending boxing match, was Mr. Harris. The old lawyer, who had served the family for 3 generations, maintained an almost unbelievable composure. He wore an old but perfectly tailored gray wool suit. His eyes, behind tortoiseshell glasses, observed everything with a cool, detached clarity. He showed no surprise at Marcus's rage, no sympathy for Leo's tension. He was simply an executor, a messenger carrying the will of the deceased. His silence was more unnerving than Marcus's shouting. It suggested that all of this confrontation, this rage was already part of the script Elias had written long ago. This vault wasn't the end. It was merely the stage for the first act of a tragic and calculated play. Leo took a deep breath, the cold flooding his lungs, and he felt the weight of 3 generations settle squarely on his shoulders. Marcus's presence in this suffocating vault was not a sudden event. It was the climax of a chaotic week, a blitzkrieg-style assault carefully calculated against the family he had once abandoned. It all began with a phone call. Leo was in the workshop, cleaning his grandfather's old tools, when his cheap smartphone rang. On the other end was a cold, professional female voice, identifying herself as an assistant from a prestigious London law firm. She announced that Mr. Marcus Andrade, as the sole legal son of the late artisan Elias Andrade, was demanding an urgent meeting regarding the division of the estate, and that all proceedings to execute the current will were to be halted immediately. The name Marcus Andrade hit Leo like a punch to the gut. Throughout his childhood, the name was almost taboo. It was only mentioned in his grandfather's heavy sighs, in his mother's quiet, hidden tears. Marcus was the family ghost, a wound that never healed. And now, that ghost had returned, not in flesh and blood, but with an army of well-armed lawyers. The next day, a barrage of legal emails and letters arrived. They were drafted in a dry, threatening language, claiming that the current will might have been written under undue influence or when Elias was not of sound mind. They insinuated that Leo, a mere grandson, had taken advantage of his grandfather's failing health to manipulate the will. Every word was a slander, a knife twisting in the sacred memory of Leo's final days caring for his grandfather. The attack wasn't limited to the legal front. A few days later, articles began appearing on financial and art news websites. They painted a dramatic story. The long-lost son of a genius artisan returns to claim his rightful inheritance from the hands of an unknown grandson. The articles, clearly paid for, portrayed Marcus as a successful, self-made businessman, a misunderstood son who now only wished to fulfill his final duty to his father. They skillfully sowed seeds of doubt about Leo, turning him into an opportunist. Leo, a private person accustomed only to the world of stones and tools, was suddenly thrown into the middle of a media storm. He felt exposed, judged by millions of strangers. The climax was Marcus's official arrival. He didn't return to the old family home where his father had taken his last breath. He didn't visit his father's grave. Instead, he held a press conference in the lobby of a five-star hotel. Leo watched it on a live stream, his stomach churning with disgust. Marcus stood before dozens of cameras, impeccably dressed, looking suitably bereaved and righteous. He spoke of his deep and abiding love for his father, of his regret for the years of distance. He claimed he returned not for money, but for legacy, to protect his father's name from falling into the wrong hands. He cried. Crocodile tears streamed down his well-manicured face. It was a perfect performance, and Leo knew that, to the outside world, his story seemed far more plausible than that of a quiet, unassuming craftsman. This battle wasn't just in a courtroom or a bank vault. It was being fought in the court of public opinion, and Leo was losing badly. Marcus's return was not the return of a son. It was an invasion, a meticulously planned campaign to seize not just the assets, but the very soul and narrative of the Andrade family. To understand Marcus's madness, one must first understand the heart of Abaddon. It wasn't just a diamond, it was a myth, a legacy woven from sweat, blood, and even whispers of the supernatural. To the world, it was a $100 million asset. But to Leo, it was his entire childhood, the physical embodiment of the grandfather he worshipped. He remembered the long winter evenings, sitting by the workshop's hearth, listening to Elias tell its story. His grandfather's deep, warm voice, mixed with the crackling of the firewood, painted a world of magic and danger. The story began in a remote, forgotten mine in Africa. A rough, blood-red diamond, the size of a child's fist, was unearthed. It was unlike any diamond ever discovered. It had a deep, almost black core, and emitted a strange, faint light even in the dark. The local miners called it the Devil's Eye, believing it was born from a drop of blood from a fallen god, Abaddon, and that it carried a curse. Anyone who touched it with greed in their heart would gain everything they desired, only to lose it all in the most tragic way possible. Many lives were lost in the fight for it, from mine bosses to wealthy collectors. It passed through many hands, and each of its owners met a grim end: bankruptcy, disease, or a mysterious death. Finally, after decades of changing hands, the rough stone came to Elias. He didn't acquire it for its monetary value. He was obsessed by its untamed beauty and its story. He saw in it not a curse, but a challenge. He believed he could tame it, releasing the beauty trapped inside and breaking the curse with his own skill and a pure heart. He spent a full 10 years just studying it. Leo remembered him saying he would spend months doing nothing but watching it under every angle of light, from dawn to candlelight, trying to find its soul, to discover how to cut it without shattering its fragile internal structure. The crafting process was a true struggle. Elias had to forge special tools himself, as conventional ones were not hard enough. He worked in a special room, completely soundproof and dust-free, to achieve absolute concentration. Leo's mother recalled that there were times Elias would stay locked in the workshop for weeks, subsisting on only bread and water, growing thin, his eyes sinking deep into their sockets from lack of sleep. He said he was conversing with the stone, and it was fighting back, testing his patience and resolve. And then, after a decade, the masterpiece was born. He named it the Heart of Abaddon, not to honor a demon, but to acknowledge its dark origins, and as a reminder that the most brilliant beauty is often born from the deepest, most painful places. When it was unveiled, the gemological world was shaken. No one could believe a human hand could create such perfect, impossible facets. It became the pinnacle of Elias's career, a living legend. To Marcus, this story was just meaningless, sentimental fluff. He saw only a commodity. He didn't see his father's 10 years of sacrifice. He didn't see the stone's bloody history. He didn't believe in the curse. He believed he was smart enough, ruthless enough, to conquer it, to convert it into cash and power. He scorned the reverence Leo held for it, seeing it as weakness, the sentimentality of a kid who didn't understand the value of a dollar. The contrast in how they viewed the Heart of Abaddon was the contrast of their entire worldviews. One was the guardian of a legacy, the other, a man who only wanted to exploit it. And the diamond, sitting silently behind its glass shield, seemed to be watching them both, waiting to see upon whom its curse would fall. The meeting took place in Mr. Harris's law office, a space that was the complete opposite of the cold bank vault. The room was paneled in dark oak, smelling of old books and leather. The late afternoon sun slanted through a large window, casting a golden, dusty glow over the space. Marcus sat across from Leo, Mr. Harris's antique mahogany desk between them. He appeared supremely confident, leaning back in the plush leather armchair, crossing his legs, and occasionally glancing at the Patek Philippe on his wrist. His legal team sat behind him, stone-faced, ready to take notes and counterattack. He believed he had Leo cornered, that, with just a little more pressure, the kid would have to agree to split the fortune. Leo, in contrast, sat with his back straight, his hands resting on his lap. He felt small in this powerful room, but he wasn't afraid. The grief of losing his grandfather and the anger at Marcus's slander had crystallized into a cold resolve. He would not back down. He was here to defend his grandfather's honor. Mr. Harris, with his usual calm demeanor, opened the meeting. He didn't get straight to the dispute. Instead, he spoke of the history of the Andrade family, of Elias's contributions to the art of gem crafting. It was a way of reminding everyone, especially Marcus, of the roots and legacy they were fighting over. Marcus began to grow impatient and cut Mr. Harris off. "Let's get to the point, Harris. We all know why we're here. This will is clearly problematic. My father would never leave everything to a grandson and cut his only son out without a penny. It's preposterous." Mr. Harris didn't flinch. He looked directly at Marcus, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Andrade, your father was a meticulous man. He anticipated that you would have such questions. Therefore, he did not leave just a written will." The old lawyer turned, opened a small cabinet, and took out an old-fashioned film projector and a video cassette. He left a final testament, a video will. The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew thick. Marcus's lawyers exchanged confused glances. Marcus frowned, looking slightly unnerved. Mr. Harris placed the projector on the desk, pulled down a white screen, and turned on the machine. After a few buzzing sounds, a familiar image appeared. It was Elias. He was sitting in his favorite armchair in the workshop. His crafting tools hung neatly on the wall behind him. He looked much thinner and weaker than the last time Leo had seen him, but his eyes were as bright and sharp as ever. He stared directly into the camera, as if he were looking through time, looking straight at every person in this room. "If you are watching this," Elias's voice filled the room, deep and clear. "Though tinged with fatigue, it means my life has ended, and the battle for my legacy has begun, especially you, Marcus." He paused, looking directly into the lens, and Leo felt as if his grandfather was staring into the very soul of his son. "I know you've returned. I know what you want. You've always been the same, only seeing the surface value of things. You look at the Heart of Abaddon, and you see $100 million. But you don't see 10 years of my life. You don't see the soul of our family embedded within it." Marcus stiffened, his face paling. "This video has no legal standing," one of his lawyers blurted out. Mr. Harris held up a hand for silence. "Please, continue watching." Elias on the screen continued. "I will not let my legacy fall into the hands of someone who doesn't understand it. But I will not disinherit you without cause. I will give you a chance, a test. The Heart of Abaddon will belong only to the one who proves he understands its soul, not its price tag. Both you, Marcus, and my grandson, Leo, will participate. My will is not a gift, it is an examination, and only one can pass." The video ended, leaving a dead silence in the room. The ultimatum had been delivered. a duel orchestrated by a dead man. The game was afoot. His grandfather's challenge echoed in Leo's mind, pulling with it a torrent of painful memories he had tried to bury for 20 years. He was no longer the 25-year-old man in a law office. He was a 5-year-old boy again, hiding behind a stack of fragrant oak planks in the corner of the workshop, holding his breath as he listened to the roars of the man he was told to call Dad. But that man had never really been his father. His father was his grandfather, Elias. Marcus was just a hurricane that occasionally swept through their quiet lives. It was pouring rain that night. The sound of it hammering on the workshop's corrugated tin roof created a chaotic soundtrack for the argument inside. The light from the single bare bulb overhead cast long, grotesque shadows of the two men. Elias stood by his workbench, his back ramrod straight, though Leo could see his shoulders trembling. Marcus paced back and forth like a caged animal. He looked younger, thinner, but the arrogance and discontent were already etched deeply onto his face. "I can't take it anymore," Marcus yelled, his voice overpowering the sound of the storm. "I'm wasting my youth in this decrepit workshop, with these lifeless rocks, while my friends are out there making millions. Don't you see, Dad? The world has changed. Nobody cares about this meticulous, slow-motion craft anymore. They care about speed, about profit. This is not a craft." Elias's voice was low and firm. "This is our family's heritage. It is art. It is patience. It is creating beauty from the roughest of materials. Those are the values my father taught me, and that I wanted to pass on to you." Marcus let out a harsh, cynical laugh. "Values? Can values buy a mansion, a sports car? Can values earn me respect in the real world? All you do is cling to the past. Look at us. We have an old workshop, a small house, and a hollow reputation that can't be cashed in. I need capital. I have a major business plan, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. All you have to do is sell a few of the rough stones or mortgage that damned heart. Just a little." Leo could see his grandfather's face contort at the mention of mortgaging the heart of Abaddon. To him, that was worse than selling his own soul. "I've told you before, Marcus, this legacy is not for sale. It is to be preserved. Money you can earn, but honor and tradition you cannot. If you want money, make it yourself, with your own 2 hands and your mind, as I did." That was the last straw. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face his father. "With these hands?" He held out his own hands. They were clean, free of calluses. "I don't want my hands to look like yours, always covered in stone dust and machine oil. I want a different life. If you won't help me, I'll find my own way." With that, he lunged toward the old safe in the corner of the workshop. Elias tried to stop him, but Marcus shoved him aside. He stumbled and fell to the floor. Leo, from his hiding spot, almost cried out. Marcus threw open the safe door and hastily grabbed a velvet bag filled with uncut, raw gemstones. "What are you doing, Marcus?" Elias struggled to sit up, his voice no longer angry, just filled with pain and disbelief. "I'm taking what's rightfully mine," Marcus said coldly. He didn't look back at his father. He walked straight to the door, but before leaving, he stopped and threw a letter onto the workbench. "It's all in there. I'm renouncing this family burden. From now on, I am no longer your son. Don't look for me." The workshop door swung open and slammed shut. A gust of cold wind and rain blew inside. Marcus had vanished into the night. All that was left was Elias, sitting alone on the cold floor amidst the wreckage of his family. Leo, from the shadows, crept out. He said nothing, just quietly came to his grandfather's side and placed his small hand on his shoulder. His grandfather looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He wasn't crying, but Leo could see that something inside him had shattered. That night, the fissure in the Andrade family had formed, and 20 years later, it had widened into an unbridgeable chasm. That memory, that pain, was what had forged Leo's will today. He wasn't just fighting for a diamond. He was fighting to protect the grandfather who had been pushed to the floor by his own son on that rainy night long ago. Following the shocking ultimatum at the law office, a tense silence fell. Marcus's legal team whispered amongst themselves, clearly unprepared for such a bizarre turn of events. A craftsmanship challenge? In the modern legal world of contracts and precedents, this felt like a misplaced fairy tale, but Elias's legally notarized video left them with few options. Marcus, after the initial shock, quickly regained his arrogant composure. He smirked. A skill test? The old man really was going senile. Does he think I, a businessman, am afraid of a little whittling? Fine, I accept. I'll show everyone who the worthy heir truly is." He said it with an over-the-top confidence, as if he had already won. He believed that with his intelligence and modern tools, he could easily defeat an inexperienced young craftsman. Mr. Harris nodded solemnly. "Very well. As per the will, the challenge will commence tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You will both have exactly 72 hours. The location will be Elias's workshop. Everything you need is there. You are permitted to bring personal tools, but you may not receive help from anyone. I will serve as the overseer." The journey back to the workshop the next morning was a starkly different experience for Leo and Marcus. For Leo, it was a pilgrimage. He drove his old pickup truck down the familiar road, his heart filled with a mix of emotions. There was anxiety about the challenge ahead, but also a sacred feeling about returning to the place he considered a sanctuary. He wasn't thinking about winning or losing. He was thinking about how to create a piece worthy of his grandfather's legacy, to honor him. He prepared a small tool roll containing the chisels and planes that his grandfather had forged by hand and passed down to him. They weren't just tools, they were relics, a continuation of a lineage. Marcus, in contrast, arrived in a sleek, black Mercedes. He stepped out of the car, wearing a designer work suit that looked completely out of place. Following him were two assistants, struggling to carry large metal cases. Inside were the most advanced power tools: a laser-guided scroll saw, a mini CNC lathe, an automated sander. He treated this challenge like a business project. Efficiency and technology were the keys to victory. He looked at the old workshop with a disdainful expression, as if about to enter a slum. At precisely 9 a.m., Mr. Harris was waiting at the door, a leather briefcase in hand. The rusty lock groaned as he turned the key. The heavy wooden door slowly swung open, revealing a space suspended in silence and the dust of time. The morning sun streamed in, creating ethereal beams of light in which dust motes danced. Mr. Harris stepped inside and placed his briefcase on Elias's main workbench. "Inside this," he said, his voice echoing in the still space, "is the original sealed design for the display box of the Heart of Abaddon." Elias drew it by hand. He opened the briefcase and took out an old roll of parchment, tied with a red silk ribbon. The wax seal of the Andrade family was still intact. With a solemn gesture, Mr. Harris broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. An incredibly complex technical drawing was revealed. It showed not only dimensions and shape, but also intricate carvings, secret joints, and handwritten notes from Elias about the type of wood, the grade of silver, and even the feeling the box needed to convey. Marcus quickly took out his phone to photograph the design, calculating the parameters. Leo was different. He bent down, gently running his fingers over the faded ink lines. He could feel his grandfather's passion in every stroke, every letter. To him, this wasn't a blueprint. It was a conversation with the deceased. "Your time begins now," Mr. Harris declared. The challenge had officially begun. Two men, two worldviews, about to clash within the heart of their own legacy. Elias's workshop was not just a room filled with tools. It was a living museum, a temple to the art of craftsmanship, where every object told a story. As the heavy door swung open, the place's signature scent washed over Leo, embracing him like a warm hug from the past. It was the smell of aged oak and ebony, the aroma of linseed oil used for polishing, the sharp tang of heated metal, and above all, the smell of fine sawdust that had steeped into every plank, every crack in the floorboards for decades. For Leo, it was the smell of home, of safety, of his grandfather. The workshop was larger than it looked from the outside. The ceiling was high, with massive wooden beams crisscrossing overhead, where colossal spiderwebs hung like installation art. Natural light poured in through large, high windows, their panes clouded with dust, creating mystical shafts of light where tiny particles danced like stars. The left wall was completely covered by wooden cabinets filled with hundreds of small drawers, each with a handwritten label from Elias, naming the types of raw gemstones inside: garnet, bloodfire, sapphire, night blue, opal, apha, dragon's eye. The opposite wall was lined with an array of old-fashioned machinery, not the screaming, modern machines, but graceful contraptions of cast iron and brass, run by leather belts and gears. A lathe from the 1952nd, a gem-grinding wheel powered by a foot pedal. They sat silently, covered in a thin layer of dust, like sleeping giants waiting to be awoken. In the center of the workshop was Elias's main workbench. It was a solid block of oak, the top nearly a foot thick, riddled with cuts, scratches, burns, and chemical stains. Every scar on it was a witness to thousands of hours of painstaking labor, to failures and brilliant successes. On the bench still lay a few of the last items he had touched: a small pair of tweezers, an unfinished quartz stone, and an old magnifying glass. Leo gently picked up the magnifying glass and held it to his eye. Through the lens, the world became astonishingly clear and detailed. He could see the tiniest ridges of his own fingerprints. This was the world his grandfather had inhabited, a world of meticulous detail and absolute focus. Leo walked through the workshop like a devotee in a church. He touched the chisels hung neatly on a rack. Their wooden handles were polished, smooth by sweat and time. Their steel blades were still sharp. He knew the name and purpose of each one. This chisel for fine details, that plane for creating soft curves. They were not inanimate objects. They were extensions of the artisan's hands, loyal companions. Marcus, on the other hand, entered the workshop with unconcealed contempt. He used a designer handkerchief to cover his nose, as if afraid of inhaling the filthy air. "Christ, this place is no better than a junkyard," he muttered. He kicked a wooden crate filled with stone fragments, causing a clattering sound that felt alien in the quiet space. He looked at the old machines with disgust. How did the old man ever work with this ancient junk? He quickly chose the cleanest corner of the workshop, laid down a tarp, and began setting up his modern machinery. The clanking of metal, the sound of him barking orders to his assistants, who were not allowed inside, from the doorway, all shattered the solemnity of the place. To Marcus, this workshop was a prison, a symbol of the past he wanted to bury. He didn't see history, didn't see a soul. He only saw obsolescence and grime. The contrast in how they interacted with this space foretold the outcome of their confrontation. A clash not just between two men, but between two generations, two value systems. One of reverence for the past, the other of blind faith in the future and efficiency. As the old grandfather clock in the corner of the workshop chimed the first hour of work, the real confrontation began. Immediately, the difference between Leo and Marcus became starkly apparent, not just in their attitudes but in every action, every sound they made. The workshop, which had been dormant for years, suddenly became a stage for two completely opposing symphonies. Leo's symphony was a chamber piece, melodic and serene. He did not rush into the work. First, he spent nearly an hour just walking around the workshop, selecting his materials. He didn't just look. He touched each plank of ebony, feeling its texture, its density. He tapped them gently, listening to the sound they produced, trying to find the one whose voice best matched the spirit of the box. He did the same with the silver ingots. He weighed them in his hands, feeling the heft and purity of the metal. For Leo, this was an indispensable step. His grandfather had taught him that an artisan must respect his materials, must understand them before he can transform them. Once he had chosen his materials, Leo began to work. He used very little machinery. He placed the ebony plank on his grandfather's workbench and started with a Japanese handsaw. The sound it made was soft, a gentle shh, almost a whisper. Every one of his cuts was slow, precise, and controlled. He wasn't fighting the wood's grain, he was flowing with it. Then came the rhythmic clinking of the chisel and wooden mallet. Tap, 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 each strike a note in the symphony of creation. He worked in silence, his entire body and mind focused on the task at hand. Occasionally, he would stop, take a step back, squinting at his work in the light, and then continue. He was like a conductor, leading an invisible orchestra, a dancer performing an ancient ritual. The space around him was filled with a quiet concentration that was almost meditative. Marcus's symphony, in contrast, was a heavy metal concert, loud, chaotic, and full of raw energy. He wasted no time feeling the materials. He used a laser scanner to analyze the wood, feeding the parameters into software on his laptop. Then, he clamped the plank down and switched on his electric saw. A deafening screech ripped through the workshop's tranquility. Sawdust flew like a miniature sandstorm. He cut brutally, quickly, leaving sharp but soulless edges. He didn't need finesse, he needed speed. Then came the shrill whine of the automated sander, the aggressive buzz of the power drill, and the angry sound of a hammer striking metal. Marcus worked like a machine. He had no connection to the work he was doing. His eyes constantly darted to the clock, then back to the design on his laptop screen. He muttered calculations to himself, cursing every time a detail didn't fit perfectly. The space around him was filled with stress, haste, and a repressed fury. He wasn't a craftsman, He was a project manager trying to meet a deadline. He saw the wood and silver merely as variables in an equation that needed to be solved as quickly as possible. This contrast was not just about working methods. It was a contrast of life philosophies. Leo believed in the process, in patience, in creating something with a soul. He believed that true beauty comes from controlled imperfection, from the mark of the human hand. Marcus believed in the result, in efficiency, in the perfection created by machines. He believed that time was money, and everything could be optimized. They were both making the same box, from the same design. But they were creating two entirely different objects. One was a work of art, an inheritance. The other was a product, a hollow replica. And in the whisper of the handsaw and the scream of the power saw, the fate of the challenge was already being written. On the second day of the challenge, as exhaustion began to set in, Marcus, with the mind of a businessman always searching for a competitive edge, discovered something he believed would be the key to his victory. He didn't waste time contemplating the curved lines or complex patterns. Instead, he used his CAD, computer-aided design software, to digitize his father's entire blueprint, analyzing it as pure data. And that's when he saw it. Hidden within the dense details of the box's base was an extremely sophisticated mechanism that would be easily overlooked by the naked eye. It was a system of tiny joints and latches that, when assembled correctly, would create a secret compartment. A compartment so small it could only hold a few folded pieces of paper or a small gemstone. It wasn't explicitly labeled. It was just faint lines, tiny technical numbers that an ordinary person would assume were part of the normal structural support. A smug smile spread across Marcus's face. Aha, he thought. I knew it. The old man never did anything simple. This isn't some stupid craftsmanship test. It's an intelligence test. A riddle. He immediately jumped to a conclusion he considered brilliant. His father, a man who always loved puzzles and secrets, had intentionally planted this detail in the design. He wanted to see which of them was smart enough, observant enough, to find it. The Leo kid, with his slow, methodical craftsman's brain, would surely just focus on carving the surface details. He would never see the brain of the box. This belief fueled Marcus with a tremendous surge of energy. He felt as if he had hacked the system, found the cheat code to the game. He poured all his focus and technical skill into crafting this secret compartment. He used his mini CNC lathe to cut the tiny wooden and metal parts with microscopic precision. The work required meticulous attention, and Marcus, while lacking the soul of an artist, had the obsessive patience of a man fixated on winning. He worked feverishly, forgetting to eat or drink. He felt a twisted connection to his deceased father. He thought he was finally understanding him, that he was decoding the final message he had left behind. He imagined the moment he would present the finished box, press a secret spot, and the small compartment would spring open to the astonishment of Leo and Mr. Harris. It would be a moment of absolute, undeniable victory. Meanwhile, on the other side of the workshop, Leo was struggling with a secret of his own, but one of a completely different nature. He wasn't looking for hidden mechanisms. He was trying to replicate an ancient Japanese wood joinery technique, one that his grandfather had noted in the margins of the blueprint. This technique used no nails or glue, relying entirely on the precision of interlocking wooden joints that locked themselves into place. It required a level of patience and accuracy that machines could not achieve. He had failed a few times, having to start over, but he wasn't discouraged. He knew that this was the soul of the box his grandfather was talking about. It wasn't a secret to be shown off, but a hidden perfection within, a strength and beauty that could only be felt, not easily seen. The two men, working in the same space, were pursuing two entirely different truths. Marcus was busy building a flashy trap he mistook for the key, and Leo was quietly building a solid foundation, a beauty that came from structural integrity. And this fateful difference, born from their very natures, would decide who truly understood the great artisan's will. The 72 hours passed in a blur, a period measured not by the ticking of the clock, but by the amount of sawdust on the floor, by the beads of sweat and the small drops of blood from nicks and scrapes on their hands. Exhaustion was etched on both their faces, but in very different ways. Leo looked tired but serene, like a man who had just completed a long pilgrimage. His eyes were sunken, but they held a quiet satisfaction. Marcus was the opposite. He was also exhausted, but it was the exhaustion of a gambler who had been up for 3 straight nights. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, and tension was still coiled in every muscle of his face. Marcus finished his box about an hour before Leo. He placed it on the workbench with a proud thud, then stepped back, crossing his arms to admire his handiwork. His box was, admittedly, a technically impressive product. The ebony was polished to a mirror shine, perfectly smooth without a single flaw. The silver inlays were laser-cut, sharp-edged, and gleaming. Everything was perfect, absolutely symmetrical. It looked like a product that had just come off a high-tech assembly line, cold, precise, and soulless. When Leo placed his box next to it, the contrast was even more striking. Leo's box looked more real. The ebony surface wasn't a perfect mirror. It had a depth and warmth that could only be achieved by hand polishing with beeswax. The silver details weren't razor sharp. They had soft curves, bearing the marks of the hammer and flame. In fact, if you looked closely, you could see a few tiny imperfections, a chisel mark that was half a millimeter off, a wood grain that wasn't perfectly straight. But it was these very imperfections that gave it life, a soul. It wasn't a product, it was a creation. Marcus scoffed when he saw Leo's box. "It looks so rustic," he commented, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "like a souvenir you'd sell to tourists." Leo didn't respond. He just stood silently beside his work. Just then, Mr. Harris entered, followed by two independent expert appraisers. Marcus, unable to wait any longer, launched into his presentation. He talked about the efficiency of his technology, the precision of his machines, and then he moved in for the kill. "But that's not all," he said, his voice full of drama. "My father was a brilliant man, and he wanted his heir to be brilliant too. He left a riddle." He picked up his box, turning it over smugly. "Most people, including my dear nephew here," he glanced at Leo, "would only see what's on the outside. But a true heir must see what's hidden within." He gently pressed a spot on the wood grain near the base. A small click was heard, and a perfectly crafted secret compartment sprang open. The appraisers let out an audible gasp of surprise. Marcus's lawyers nodded in approval. He looked at Leo with the eyes of an absolute victor. "You see, it takes a son to understand his father. This was a test of intelligence, not some monkey's woodworking project. I solved the code. I have proven that I am the worthy heir." Leo stood still, showing no surprise or disappointment. He just looked at his box, then at Marcus's. For a moment, he thought that maybe he was wrong, that maybe he had been too naive to focus only on craftsmanship while missing such a crucial detail. Marcus's confidence was overwhelming, crushing. He had staged his drama perfectly. His moment of victory seemed undeniable, and a heavy silence fell over the workshop, awaiting the final verdict. In the moment after Marcus revealed the secret compartment, the air in the workshop seemed to freeze. His smugness radiated through the room, dominating everything. He stood there, chest puffed out, breathing deeply, savoring the moment he believed was the pinnacle of his wisdom and power. His lawyers whispered their congratulations. The appraisers nodded, clearly impressed by the mechanism's complexity. All eyes turned to Mr. Harris, awaiting a confirmation, an acknowledgement of what seemed to be a clear victory. Mr. Harris, however, showed no haste. He maintained his calm, emotionless expression. He slowly approached the workbench, carefully putting on a pair of white cotton gloves. First, he picked up Marcus's box. He turned it over and over, examining the edges. He even used a small magnifying glass to inspect the joints. Then, he pressed the secret compartment again. It popped open, and he closed it. A dry click echoed. Marcus smiled, assuming the old lawyer was admiring his exquisite work. But then, Mr. Harris did something unexpected. He made no comment on the secret compartment. Instead, he turned to one of the expert appraisers and asked a seemingly unrelated question. "Sir, in the original blueprint, did Elias make any notes regarding a secret mechanism?" The expert, an elderly man with silver hair, squinted in thought and then shook his head. "Not at all. The blueprint is extremely detailed about the structure, the materials, the carving techniques, but there is absolutely not a single line mentioning a secret compartment. I've checked very thoroughly." The color drained slightly from Marcus's face. His smile became a bit forced. That's the whole point. My father wanted to test our perception, not just our simple reading comprehension," he quickly defended. Mr. Harris did not reply. He just quietly put Marcus's box down. Then, he turned to Leo's box. He examined it with the same careful attention. He ran his gloved hand over the warm wood surface, feeling the softness of the curves. He closely inspected the dovetail joints, where they interlocked perfectly without a drop of glue. Finally, he looked at Leo and asked, "Did you find any details about a secret compartment in the blueprint?" Leo shook his head. No, sir. I only saw his instructions about technique, about balance, and about the feeling the box needed to have. I tried my best to follow those. The tension in the room began to mount. Everyone could sense something was wrong. Marcus's perfect drama was beginning to show cracks. He started to fidget, his foot tapping nervously on the floor. And then, Mr. Harris delivered the final blow. He turned to look directly at Marcus, his voice for the first time holding a hint of cold steel. Mr. Andrade, that secret compartment. It was the trap. Your father knew your nature very well. He knew you would never follow the righteous path. He knew you would always look for a shortcut, a dishonest advantage, a code to win without real effort. Every word from Mr. Harris was like a hammer blow to Marcus's ego. He deliberately added those faint lines, those meaningless technical numbers, to see who would be deceived by their own greed and cunning. He created a perfect trap for someone like you. And you, Mr. Andrade, walked right into it without a moment's hesitation. All sound in the workshop seemed to die. Marcus's lawyers stood with their mouths agape. The appraisers looked at each other, then back at the blueprint, finally understanding. Marcus's face went from smug to confused, from confused to incredulous, and finally, a raw panic began to dawn in his eyes. That's impossible. You're lying, he stammered. His spectacular drama had come to an abrupt and brutal end. The stage was now bare, revealing only a stark and humiliating truth. The silence following Mr. Harris's declaration was so profound you could have heard a pin drop. Marcus stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He stammered, trying to form a rebuttal, but no words could escape his tight, choked throat. The trap he was so proud of discovering was now the very thing strangling him. Mr. Harris, not letting the silence linger, continued to explain, his voice clear and unforgiving. The real challenge Elias set forth was not in an extra detail, a clever trick. On the contrary, it was in the perfection of every missing detail, in the things that cannot be seen with the naked eye. It was in the integrity of the structure, in the absolute balance of the creation. With that, Mr. Harris motioned to one of the experts. The man brought out a small glass case containing a hypersensitive digital scale, the kind used to weigh diamonds and precious metals. He placed the scale on the table, plugged it in, and turned it on. The LED screen glowed with the number 0 gram. In the notes in the margins of the blueprint, Mr. Harris continued. The notes that Mr. Andrade probably dismissed as unimportant, Elias wrote very clearly about one thing. He didn't write about a secret compartment. He wrote about the weight of the soul. He believed that a perfect work of art must have an absolute balance, not just aesthetically, but physically. He calculated that the precise weight of the finished box, including wood, silver, and the air inside, must be 3,333 grams, no more, no less. A number symbolizing the harmony of the 3 generations of the Andrade family. Everyone held their breath. Marcus looked at the scale as if it were a monster. He had never once considered the weight. He was only concerned with creating the secret compartment. The extra metal and wood mechanisms he had added had certainly altered the box's weight entirely. Mr. Harris, with a solemn gesture, carefully placed Marcus's flashy box onto the scale's platform. The numbers on the LED screen danced wildly for a few seconds and then settled. 3,412.789 gram. The number glowed, cold and irrefutable. It was nearly 80 grams too heavy, nearly 80 grams of deceit, of greed, of failure. Marcus swayed, looking like he might collapse. He stared at the number as if it were a death sentence. Then, Mr. Harris removed Marcus's box and placed Leo's on the scale. The box that looked so rustic, so soulful, and seemingly unremarkable. The numbers danced again. Leo's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea about this weight challenge. He had simply tried to follow every one of his grandfather's instructions as honestly as he could, trying to recreate the work with all the respect and skill he possessed. He hadn't added or subtracted anything that wasn't on the blueprint. And then, the numbers stopped. 3,333.001 gram. An almost non-existent deviation, a near-perfect accuracy achieved not by machines, but by the craftsman's understanding and integrity. A collective sigh of relief and admiration came from the experts. Mr. Harris nodded, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. There was no trick here, he said. Only craftsmanship, only respect, only an understanding of the legacy. This was the real code that Elias left behind, and only Leo could solve it because he wasn't trying to solve it. He was simply listening. The final truth had been revealed, not through grand speeches or complex evidence, but by a simple number on a scales display, a number that had weighed not just wood and silver, but honor and greed. The instant the scale confirmed the result, a small click sounded from a hidden corner of the workshop. All eyes darted towards the white wall, where a wooden panel had just slid aside, revealing the lens of a hidden mini projector. Light flickered on, and once again, the image of Elias appeared, sharp and vivid on the wall. But this time, he wasn't in his workshop. He was sitting in the bank's security vault, and behind him, the heart of Abaddon was glowing brightly. This was clearly a recording made after the first one, a final message for the victor and the vanquished. The Elias on the screen looked more tired, but his eyes shone with an unusual resolve. He looked directly into the camera, and this time, it seemed he was speaking to only one person. Marcus, his voice boomed, no longer with disappointment but with a cold finality. If you are watching this, it means you have failed the test. It means that greed, once again, has clouded your judgment and conquered your reason. You haven't changed at all in 20 years. Marcus stood frozen, the blood drained from his face. He stared at the image of his dead father, who seemed to be judging him from beyond the grave. "Do you know why I created this test?" Elias continued. "Not to humiliate you, but to give you one last chance to look at yourself. I wanted you to face the legacy you abandoned. I had hoped, a faint hope, that when you touched these tools, when you breathed the air of this place, some part of the old you, the son I once loved, would return. But I was wrong." Elias sighed, a deep, weary sigh. "I knew you would look for a shortcut. I knew you would be tempted by the secret compartment. It's exactly how you've always chosen the easy path in life. You never understood that true value lies not in the flashy exterior, but in the solid foundation within." And then, Elias delivered the final, unassailable, legal blow. "But this test was just theater, Marcus. Theater to expose your nature for all to see. The fate of the heart of Abaddon was decided long ago. On that rainy night 20 years ago, Marcus's heart seemed to stop. Do you remember the paper you wrote that night?" Elias asked, his eyes boring into the camera. "The letter you threw on the table before you took the raw stones? Perhaps you thought they were just angry words, but I kept it, and I had you sign it, a binding agreement. In it, you wrote that you voluntarily renounced all rights as a son, all responsibilities, and, most importantly, all rights of inheritance to the estate of the Andrade family. In return, I promised not to report your theft to the police. You signed it without hesitation, because back then, freedom and a little money were more valuable to you than family." Mr. Harris, as if on cue, opened his leather briefcase and took out a yellowed piece of paper, preserved in a protective plastic sleeve. He placed it on the table. At the bottom of the page was Marcus's signature, shaky but clear. "That document," Elias's voice rang out one last time, "along with this will, is fully legally binding. I am not disinheriting you, Marcus. I am simply honoring the choice you yourself made 20 years ago. You sold your inheritance for a new start. You cannot come back now and demand to have both." The video flickered and died. Elias's image vanished, leaving only the plain white wall, but his message still echoed, shattering every one of Marcus's hopes and plans into a million pieces. He hadn't just lost a challenge, he had been defeated by his own past, by a selfish choice he had made long, long ago. Marcus's downfall was not a slow decay, it was an implosion, a chain reaction triggered by his failure in the workshop. The moment Elias's final message ended, Marcus's state-of-the-art smartphone, which had been silent for 72 hours, began vibrating violently in his pocket. He shakily pulled it out, the screen lighting up with dozens of missed calls and hundreds of unread messages and emails. He opened a text from his lead attorney. The words were short, cold, and brutal. "It's all collapsing. Call me now." At the same time, the phones of the other lawyers with him also began to ring. An air of panic enveloped Marcus's once confident team. He frantically scrolled through the news headlines on his phone. Billionaire Marcus Andrade, accused of fraud. Financial empire on the brink of collapse. Leaked documents. Andrade Capital drowning in debt. Utilized shadow loans. The $100 million inheritance battle that exposed the truth about self-made mogul Marcus Andrade. It turned out that while Marcus was preoccupied with the challenge, his business rivals, who had long been suspicious of his rapid success, had seized this opportunity to strike. The press conference he had so proudly held had attracted the wrong kind of attention. Investigative journalists had started digging, and they had found plenty of dirt. Marcus's entire financial empire was built on a foundation of sand. Massive loans, high-risk investments that were essentially gambling, and empty promises to his investors. He had used his polished image and the story of his family's legacy to attract capital. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the heart of Abaddon was his last-ditch effort to save himself. The revelation of the signed agreement renouncing his inheritance was the fatal blow. It not only destroyed his financial hopes, but also completely ruined his credibility. A man who would sell out his own family could never be a trustworthy business partner. Marcus's phone rang again. This time, it was his young wife. He answered, only to hear screaming on the other end. Creditors were surrounding their mansion. The bank had sent a notice freezing all their assets. She shrieked that she was filing for divorce, that he was a fraud. The call ended abruptly. Marcus stood there, in the middle of the dusty workshop, the phone slipping from his numb hand and shattering on the floor. But he no longer cared. He looked around, his eyes vacant. Money, power, family, reputation, everything he had spent his life chasing, everything he had traded his soul for, had evaporated in a matter of minutes. He had had it all, and now he had lost it all. He looked up at the image of the heart of Abaddon on the blueprint. The curse. It wasn't some supernatural magic. It was the ruthless law of cause and effect. His greed had given him the drive to rise, but that same greed had dug a deep pit beneath his feet. And now, he had fallen in. There was nothing left. Only a hollow emptiness and the mocking laughter of fate, a fate he had chosen for himself on that rainy night 20 years ago. The curse of the blood diamond had finally been fulfilled. Marcus left the workshop not with rage, but with a terrifying emptiness. He didn't scream, didn't threaten, he simply walked away, stumbling like a ghost, and disappeared through the door, leaving behind a life that had been reduced to ashes. Silence returned to the workshop, but this time it wasn't the silence of forgotten time, but the quiet calm after a violent storm. Leo stood alone in the familiar space. He looked at the box he had made, then at Marcus's flashy but failed creation. He looked at his grandfather's tools and felt a connection deeper than ever before. He had won, but there was no sense of triumph in his heart, only a profound sadness for a family tragedy, for an uncle he had never really known. Mr. Harris came to Leo's side and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Leo," he said, his voice warm. "You didn't just pass his test. You saved the soul of your family." A few days later, as per the final terms of the will, Leo, as the challenge's victor and the sole legal heir, was given full authority to decide the fate of the heart of Abaddon. The entire art and financial world held its breath. Would this young man sell it and become one of the richest people on the planet? Would he keep it for himself as a personal treasure? Leo made a decision that stunned everyone. He wouldn't sell it, nor would he keep it. He remembered his grandfather's words in the video, that a true legacy is not meant to be possessed, but to be shared and preserved. He contacted the National Museum, the most prestigious institution in the country. He agreed to place the heart of Abaddon on permanent loan, with two conditions. First, it had to be displayed in its own dedicated space, telling its entire history, from the curse to Elias's crafting process. Second, beside the diamond, the ebony box that Leo himself had made had to be displayed as a testament to the continuation of the legacy. The museum agreed immediately. The heart of Abaddon, the diamond of curses and greed, had finally found a peaceful home. It was no longer a private asset, but a piece of the nation's cultural heritage, for all to admire its beauty and learn from its story. It had been freed from the curse of ownership. With the remaining fortune his grandfather had left, Leo didn't buy supercars or mansions. He used the entire sum to fulfill a bigger dream. He restored and expanded his grandfather's old workshop, turning it into the Elias Andrade Academy of Gemstone Arts. It was a non-profit school, dedicated to talented young people with passion, but without the financial means to study. He invited the best master craftsmen to teach, and he himself taught classes, passing on the techniques, the lessons, and most importantly, the philosophy of patience and respect that his grandfather had taught him. The story ends with Leo standing in the workshop, now filled with light and the voices and laughter of young students. He is guiding a young woman's hands as she learns to hold a chisel, his own calloused hands covering her delicate ones. The true legacy of the Andrade family was no longer locked inside a glittering diamond behind protective glass. It was alive, growing, being passed from one generation to the next, in every cut, every polish, in the hearts of future artisans. Leo had not just inherited a fortune, he had become the keeper and spreader of an eternal flame.